These are some of the most shocking controversies involving game developers, and as the video goes on, it moves from workplace complaints to moments that shook the entire industry. On December 17, 2012, thousands of players rushed to the Steam website to get their hands on a new zombie survival game called The War Z, expecting to jump into the next big hit. The game had become a bestseller before anyone had even tried it, but when players sat down to play it on their devices, they realized they had all been sold a lie. It all started back in 2003 with Sergei Titov, a Russian-born developer who was trying to find his footing in the gaming industry and build something of his own. One of the first projects he worked on was big rigs over-the-road racing, and it quickly became famous for all the wrong reasons. The game barely worked, was full of bugs, and felt unfinished to the point where players couldn't even take it seriously. It earned a reputation as one of the worst games ever made with a metric score of just 8 out of 100. Metric score, in case you didn't know, is a weighted average of critical reviews for movies, TV shows, video games, and music. But instead of fading out after that, Sergei found his way back into the industry, and between 2006 and 2008, he worked at Riot Games as a technical director on League of Legends, a game that was blowing up at the time. Then, in 2008, he left and started his own company, Arctos Entertainment Group, which basically funded smaller studios and gave him a setup to build and release games on his own terms. One of those studios was Hammerpoint Interactive, which was the team actually making the games, and another company called OP Productions handled putting those games on platforms like Steam. By 2011, things were starting to pick up again under Sergei's setup, when a studio backed by his company put out a free-to-play shooting game called War Inc. Battlezone, built using Arctos' own Eclipse game engine. A game engine, in case you don't know, is the foundational software framework used to build video games. And though it was just another online shooting game, behind the scenes, its code and assets ended up becoming the base for what came next. Around that time, the survival genre was blowing up because of DayZ, a survival game created by Dean Hall, where players had to survive in a harsh open world filled with zombies and other players. So in May 2012, someone from the War Inc. team went onto a DayZ forum and straight up asked the community if Arctos should make something similar. That one question pretty much set the direction, because not long after that, on July 19, 2012, Hammerpoint Interactive officially announced The War Z. From the outside, a lot of people started calling it out as a clear attempt to ride the wave that DayZ had just created, especially with how similar the name sounded and how quickly everything was moving. Sergei, on the other hand, pushed back on that, saying the game had actually been in development for a while and wasn't just thrown out together to cash in on the trend. On October 15, 2012, the War Z finally went into open alpha, which basically meant regular players could jump in early and try it out before full release. But instead of building hype, it started raising eyebrows, because a lot of players felt like they were just playing a slightly tweaked version of War Inc., the earlier shooter built under Sergei's setup, with things looking and feeling way too familiar. Even the terms of service had issues, because parts of it looked almost identical to League of Legends, and still carried references to Riot Games. Around the same time, Sergei went on a forum and called out players who were spawn camping using a homophobic slur, referring to those who wait around spawn points just to take out other players the moment they appear. The reaction was immediate, and it got serious enough that a press representative had to step in and release a statement calling it a poor and inappropriate choice of words. Then in November, another problem hit, this time on the legal side. The name The War Z got flagged by the US Patent and Trademark Office because it was too close to World War Z, which was an upcoming film from Paramount Pictures about a zombie apocalypse. By late November 2012, things started getting more heated when the game introduced a paid clan system. This meant that players had to spend real money to create and grow their groups. However, after a huge backlash on November 28th, the base fee to start a clan was removed, but the real cost was still there, because adding more members cost money. For example, expanding beyond 20 characters meant paying in-game currency, and for a full clan, it could add up to around $45, which didn't sit well with players at all. The next day, on November 29th, things got even worse. Players who were asking for refunds were told their details could be put on a blacklist, meaning they wouldn't be able to buy anything again using the same service. Around the same time, the terms of service were updated to block refunds entirely, which raised serious concerns since rules like that aren't even legal in some countries. Then more than 2 weeks later on December 14th, the developers made a forum post announcing a wave of bans targeting hackers, but instead of calming things down, it created more frustration, because a lot of regular players got caught up in those bans too, even though they hadn't done anything wrong. 3 days later on December 17th, The War Z officially launched on Steam and instantly shot to the top as the best-selling game. But almost as quickly as people jumped in, they started noticing that many features listed on the store page, like private servers, multiple large maps, skill systems, and 100-player servers, just weren't there. The very next day, December 18th, in an interview, Sergey didn't really clear things up. Instead of addressing why features were missing, he focused on wording and tried to explain it in a way that didn't answer what players were actually asking. And at the same time, the game got an update that made things worse. After dying in the game, players now had to wait up to 4 hours to play again, unless they paid money to skip the wait instantly. Later that day, Sergey posted an apology on the forums, but instead of owning up to what went wrong, he said players had misread the game's features and brushed off the backlash by calling some of them extreme DayZ fans or people expecting too much. By the next day on December 19th, things had gone too far to ignore. So much so that Valve Corporation, the company behind Steam, stepped in and pulled the War Z from the store completely, saying it had been released too early. They also offered full refunds to players, which rarely ever happened before. At the same time, Valve started looking into what was happening on the Steam forums. It turned out some of the developers were banning players just for criticizing the game, and when those players tried to appeal, they were getting the same copy-paste response accusing them of hacking, even when they hadn't done anything wrong. On December 28th, Sergey came back, publishing an open letter where he admitted he'd gotten carried away. In it, he said, "I became arrogant and blinded by the early success and quick growth of the War Z. I chose not to notice the concerns and questions raised by these members of the game community as well as others." He also acknowledged that instead of engaging with players and listening to feedback, the team had been busy shutting down critics. 2 months later, on February 26, 2013, Valve Corporation allowed the War Z back onto Steam after working with the developers to fix the store page and clean up the misleading information. The refund window was closed, and the game went back on sale for $15. But just when things seemed to be settling down, a little over a month later on April 2nd, OP Productions, the company publishing the game, announced that both the game and its forums had been shut down after hackers broke into their systems. Players' data like email addresses, character names, and IP addresses were exposed. And on top of that, the game's source code ended up leaking online too, creating a whole new set of problems. But despite that, by June 19th, 2013, the game came back under a new name. Hammerpoint rebranded the War Z as Infestation Survivor Stories to avoid the ongoing trademark issues with the movie World War Z. Not long after that, in 2014, Sergey slowly started stepping away from the spotlight. He split from OP Productions, shut down Hammerpoint Interactive, and set up a new studio called Free Reign Entertainment under his company Arctos. From that point on, he stayed more behind the scenes, with different company names being used instead of his own. In the following years of 2015 and 2016, new survival games such as Romero's Aftermath and Shattered Skies were put up on Steam's store. On the surface, they looked like fresh projects, but when people started playing, they noticed that they felt very similar to what had come before, and when online investigators looked into it, they found connections tying everything back to Sergey across multiple companies, even though his name wasn't being openly attached to those games anymore. In the end, the game was heavily criticized across the board, landing a Metacritic score of just 20 out of 100, with some reviews going as low as 1 out of 10. Over time, it built a reputation as one of the worst games of all time. By December 15th, 2016, it was officially over when the servers for Infestation Survivor Stories were permanently shut down, meaning the original version of the game was no longer playable at all. Around the same time, a different developer released Infestation, the New Z, but it was a separate project, and the original game tied to Sergey was done for good. But even after all that, Sergey didn't fully step away. In May 2020, reports came out that he was working on another zombie survival game, once again through different studio names, continuing the same pattern of building and releasing similar titles. But if the War Z controversy was unsettling, what happened to the day before would go even further, turning a familiar kind of deception into something far larger and harder to ignore.
Sure, you can boot it up and enter the game, but saying you could play the game is a bit generous.
For nearly 3 years, millions of players around the world followed a game called The Day Before, adding it to their lists and waiting for its release after seeing trailers that made it look like one of the biggest survival games ever created. But within just 4 days of the game's release, the studio behind it shut down completely and vanished into thin air. The story began in 2012 in Yukashia, a remote region in eastern Russia, where 2 brothers, Edward and Isan Gotovstev, received money from their local government to make a video game that they used to create a small game called Midnight Macabre, which they released on Big Fish Games, a website where people from around the world could download and play simple games. They did not earn much money, but it gave them their first experience of making a game and releasing it to players outside their own country. A few years later, in 2015, the brothers started their own game company called Fantastic, and instead of working from one office, they built a team of people from different countries who all worked from their own homes. Together they began creating a new game called The Wild 8, which was about players working as a team to survive in a dangerous frozen wilderness. In 2016, the studio asked players for financial support by putting the game on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, and raised a total of $121,616, showing that there were real players who were interested in the game and willing to support it before it was finished. That led to an important moment in 2017 when The Wild 8 was released on Steam, and on the very first day, the game sold about 12,000 copies and became one of the top-selling games on the platform within the first 2 hours of its release. It had earned enough money to keep the company going and gave the brothers the confidence to try building something much bigger next time. On January 29, 2021, Fantastic, along with another game publisher called Mytona, revealed a new game called The Day Before through a trailer released on IGN, a well-known website that shares news and videos about games, and the 5-minute video showed what looked like a huge open-world survival game set in a ruined American city, where players could explore buildings, drive vehicles, collect supplies, and interact with other survivors, all presented as if it was real gameplay from the actual game. Within just a few days, the trailer spread quickly, and The Day Before became the most added game on Steam, meaning more people were waiting for it than any other game on the platform. But at the same time, some experienced developers and journalists began to question how a relatively small and little-known studio like Fantastic could create something that looked so large and detailed. About 2 months later, on April 9, 2021, the studio released yet another longer gameplay video, again through IGN, which showed players fighting zombies and searching through houses for supplies. But even though the footage looked even more polished, the same concerns grew stronger because no journalists or independent players were ever allowed to try the game themselves or confirm that it actually existed in the form being shown. Later that year, on December 1st, 2021, Fantastic released a different game called Prop Night on Steam, which was a multiplayer horror game where some players could turn into objects to hide from a killer, and while it did attract some players, the response was mixed. Then 5 months later, in May 2022, Fantastic announced that The Day Before was being moved to a new game engine called Unreal Engine 5, which developers use to build and run games, and along with that change, the studio delayed the release from June 21st, 2022 to March 2023, marking the first in a series of delays that would eventually push the game back 4 separate times over more than 2 years, all while no journalists or players were ever given a chance to try the game themselves. Just a month later, in June 2022, information on Fantastic's own website showed that around 40 people were working on the game as unpaid volunteers, handling important tasks and translating the game into different languages, testing for bugs and managing the community, and instead of being paid, they were only given certificates and free copies of the game, which led to criticism because these were jobs that are usually done by paid professionals. When this setup was questioned by gaming websites like Eurogamer, the Gotovstev brothers responded with a public letter saying that Fantastic was still a normal business and that their goal was to create fantastic products, but they did not make any changes to how these volunteers were being treated or offered to pay them. Then, on January 19th, 2023, another problem appeared when someone who had registered the name The Day Before as a trademark in the United States filed a complaint. This led Steam to remove the game from its store page, meaning players could no longer view it or add it as a result, and so the planned March 2023 release was delayed again, this time pushing it to November 10th, 2023. After the trademark issue, doubts about the game quickly grew stronger, and major gaming websites like Kotaku openly started questioning whether The Day Before was actually a real, working game. In the weeks leading up to the release, the studio finally showed a live gameplay stream to the public for the first time, but instead of building confidence, the video spread online for all the wrong reasons, as viewers pointed out that many of the buildings, objects, and even characters looked very similar to ready-made assets from the Unreal Engine marketplace, which is a store where developers can buy pre-made game content instead of creating it themselves. Then on December 7th, 2023, The Day Before finally released on Steam in a paid early access version priced at $39.99, and within hours, it climbed to the top of the platform's sales charts and reached more than 30,000 players at the same time. But despite that strong start, many players found that they could not even connect to the game's servers or enter a match at all. Players who were able to enter the game quickly realized that it did not match what had been shown in years of trailers, because instead of a large open-world online game, The Day Before was a much smaller extraction-style shooter with a limited map, empty environments, very little content, broken enemy behavior, and a city that felt almost completely lifeless, with none of the detailed features or large-scale systems that had been advertised. Within the first 24 hours, around 85% of the player reviews on Steam were negative, placing the game among the worst reviewed titles on the platform, while IGN gave it a score of 4.6 out of 10, and reviews across multiple major outlets confirmed that the released game did not resemble what had been marketed over the previous 3 years. Then, on December 11th, 2023, just 4 days after the launch, Fantastic posted a statement on X announcing that the studio was shutting down permanently, claiming that the game had failed financially and that all money earned from sales was being used to pay off debts to business partners, without mentioning any compensation for the players who had purchased it. On that same day, Eduard Gutowstev, the company's CEO, deleted his accounts on X and LinkedIn, while the studio removed its YouTube channel and shut down its website and Medium page, causing it to erase all of the trailers, updates, and public statements that had been used to promote the game over the past 3 years. In the hours before announcing its shutdown, Fantastic quietly changed the developer name listed on the Steam page of its earlier game, The Wild 8, from Fantastic to 8 Points, a move that appeared to distance the studio's previous work from its name just as the closure was about to become public. After announcing the shutdown, the studio released another statement addressing refunds. In the statement, it said, "Answer to those who ask for a refund. My toner and we're currently working with Steam to allow refunds for any player who chooses to request one, regardless of game time. Fantastic received $0 and will receive nothing from The Day Before sales." The statement directly contradicted its earlier statement that all revenue was being used to pay off partner debts. But soon after, Steam had to step in and started offering full refunds to every player who had purchased The Day Before, removing its usual rules that limited refunds based on playtime or how long the game was bought. And at the same time, the platform completely removed the game from its store, preventing any new players from buying it. On January 22, 2024, the online servers for Prop Night, one of Fantastic's earlier games, were permanently shut down, and with The Day Before already removed, every game the studio had released was either now unavailable or no longer supported on Steam, erasing the company's presence from the platform. Months later, on September 27, 2024, the same founders returned under a new name, Fantastic 2.0, and launched a crowdfunding campaign on Kickstarter for a new multiplayer game called Escape Factory, setting a goal of $20,000. But the campaign raised only $3,146 from just 14 backers before being cancelled, showing that after everything that had happened, very few people were willing to trust them again. But if The Day Before was shocking, what comes next was even more disturbing, because it involved one of gaming's most famous creators in a controversy no one expected.
Sonic, essentially, one of the creators of Sonic the Hedgehog, was arrested.
It was November 17th, 2022. Yuji Naka, the mastermind behind Sonic the Hedgehog, received a knock on his door. On the other side were Tokyo prosecutors standing with a warrant for his arrest. This was because, behind the image of a well-known video game creator, Yuji was involved in actions that eventually placed him at the center of a major financial scandal in the gaming world. Born in Hirata, Japan, Yuji Naka developed an interest in programming during high school. He first rose to fame with the hit game he helped create in the 1990s, Sonic the Hedgehog. Since then, he's been part of the development of several games, including multiple sequels for Sonic. In 2018, a video game company, Square Enix, hired Yuji to design a new 3D platform game called Balan Wonderworld. He was hired because of his past success on Sonic the Hedgehog, as the company looked to make another major hit. In late January 2020, the company was quietly co-developing a new game called Dragon Quest Tact with another partner studio, Aiming Inc. It hadn't been announced publicly yet, but people inside the company knew about it and how far along it was, including Yuji, who had been working there for the past 2 years and came across the project as it was nearing release. But unlike the others, he saw it as an opportunity for something shadier. Yuji decided to use that information to buy shares in Aiming Inc. This is what's known as insider trading, which is when someone uses private company information to make a profit on stocks before the public knows. It is illegal in many countries, including Japan, because it gives certain people an unfair advantage over regular investors. Yuji believed that once the game was announced and released, Aiming's stock price would rise sharply, allowing him to make a large profit, so he went ahead and bought 10,000 shares in the company, spending around $20,000, which is around 2.8 million yen, on the transaction. He went so far as to dig into Square Enix's internal files, accessing records he had no business looking at. There, he discovered that the company was involved in another such joint development project. It was a mobile game called Final Fantasy VII: The First Soldier, with a company called A-Team. Using that, this time he went much bigger and bought 120,000 shares of A-Team stocks, spending around $1 million US. The next year, in March 2021, Square Enix finally released Balan Wonderworld, which Yuji and his team spent around 3 years working on. However, the game received poor reviews and was called a massive failure. And so, less than 2 months after its release on April 30th, 2021, Yuji announced his resignation from the company. He later stated on social media, "I resigned from Square Enix at the end of April. While I cannot share the reason right now, I hope to be able to discuss it when the time comes. As for what I'll do in the future, I'm already 55 years old, so I may as well retire." For him, this was a calculated move since he was expecting to make enough money from the profits on his stocks anyway. But all of that would come crashing down when the stock purchases caught the attention of the Securities and Exchange Surveillance Commission, SESC, in Japan. They noticed the unusual manner in which the stocks had been bought by Yuji and flagged the purchases as suspicious and opened a criminal investigation against him. About 1 year and 8 months after Yuji resigned from Square Enix, on November 17th, 2022, Tokyo prosecutors arrested Yuji for suspicion of insider trading in his purchase of the Aiming shares. Over the following days, his fans expressed surprise and disappointment on social media. One user posted on X, formerly Twitter, "Please tell me this isn't true. He brought Sonic to life. I'm so sad." Another user said, "He worked on so many games. So disappointing." But for him, the nightmare wasn't over yet, as just a few weeks later, on December 7th, 2022, Japanese authorities took Yuji into custody again. This time, he was arrested for his bulk purchase of A-Team stocks before the Final Fantasy game announcement. By late December 2022, Yuji was charged with violating Japan's financial laws. On March 2nd, 2023, Yuji was sent to trial, where he admitted that he bought the stocks knowing about the unannounced games. Prosecutors also noted that Yuji generated over $125,000, 20 million yen, in profit from both the illegal trades. 3 months later, another court hearing was held in June 2023. The prosecution demanded that Yuji receive a strict penalty for his actions and be sentenced to 2.5 years in prison with heavy fines. Yuji's defense requested the courts to go easy on him by reducing the fine and suspending the prison sentence, arguing that Yuji showed genuine remorse for his actions. On July 7th, 2023, the Tokyo District Court officially sentenced Yuji Naka to 2.5 years in prison, but the sentence was suspended. A suspended sentence means he won't serve prison time unless he violates the terms of his probation. In addition to that, he was ordered to pay separate fines for each offense, totaling around $1 million US, 170 million yen, for the profits he made illegally. Yuji's name is now linked to a major insider trading case in the Japanese gaming industry, and Balan Wonderworld, his final project, became one of the most mocked games of the decade. If that controversy was unexpected, what came next involved an entire company facing a massive employee walkout.
And today I want to talk to you about the importance of company culture in relation to harassment claims. And one particular instance that has been in the news lately is against a company called Activision Blizzard.
In July 2021, thousands of employees in the Activision Blizzard headquarters in Santa Monica, California, began leaving their desks and gathering outside, while top executives of the company started stepping down from their roles one by one. This is the company behind some of the biggest games ever created, including Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Overwatch, StarCraft, Diablo, and even Candy Crush, and it all traced back to a lawsuit that exposed what had allegedly been happening inside the company for years. About a week ago, the state of California filed a lawsuit against Activision Blizzard, accusing one of the biggest gaming companies in the world of a toxic work culture, unfair pay, and widespread harassment. Inside the company, it hit very differently because for a lot of employees, this wasn't some new accusation, but was something they had been living with for years. So when the company came out and brushed it all off as distorted and false, it struck a nerve, because to the people inside, it felt like everything they had experienced was being dismissed right there in public. Within a week, things reached a breaking point when thousands of employees signed an open letter pushing back against their own company and then walked out together. As the backlash kept building, Bobby Kotick, the CEO of Activision Blizzard, stepped in and called out the company for its tone-deaf response earlier and admitted that they had handled it badly. On August 3rd, 2021, Blizzard's president, J. Allen Brack, stepped down from his role, and he was one of the most senior figures tied to the company's biggest games. Around the same time, Jesse Maschuk, the head of human resources, the person responsible for handling workplace issues like these, also left the company. But it didn't just stop there, because about a week later, the cracks spread even deeper into the people actually making the games. Luis Barriga, who was leading Diablo 4, along with Jesse McCree, a senior designer who had previously also worked on Overwatch, and Jonathan LeCraft, another longtime developer, all left the company. Around the same time, the people who had put money into the company stepped in and filed a class action lawsuit, meaning a group of them took legal action together. They accused Activision Blizzard of not being honest about the state investigation. By September, the situation took another turn when the state of California accused the company of destroying evidence while the investigation was going on. At the same time, a US government agency that keeps an eye on big companies and protects investors stepped in and started demanding answers directly from the top executives, including the CEO. Following all these allegations, the company agreed to set aside $18 million to cut a deal with a federal workplace watchdog, an agency that handles complaints about unfair treatment at work. By mid-October, the company finally tried to show it was taking action. Fran Townsend, one of the senior executives who had been speaking on behalf of the company during the crisis, told employees that more than 20 people had faced consequences inside the company, things like warnings, suspensions, or being pushed out of their roles, and over 20 others had already left altogether. However, for many people watching, it still felt like the company was not really fixing the root of the problem. Towards the end of October, the pressure started closing in on the very top. Bobby asked the board to cut his salary down to the legal minimum in California, about $62,500 a year, which was a huge drop for someone in his position. And then came the moment that really shifted everything. When in November, a major report by the Wall Street Journal revealed that Bobby had known about some of these misconduct issues for years and kept quiet. After that report came out, things escalated fast. Employees started planning another walkout, and this time the anger was aimed straight at the top. People inside the company, investors, and even the wider gaming community started calling for CEO Bobby Kotick to step down. The shockwave spread beyond the company itself. Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, basically the biggest names in gaming and some of Activision's closest partners, all spoke up about the situation, saying how they would like to make changes to how they did business with the company in the future. Around the same time, another issue started bubbling up inside the company. Workers from Raven Software, which is another studio under Activision Blizzard that helps develop games, started protesting after layoffs hit their team. These were QA testers, the people who test games for bugs, and they sent a letter to management saying this wasn't just about job cuts, it was part of a bigger pattern of how employees were being treated. And just when it felt like the story had reached its peak, it took a sharp turn. In January 2022, Microsoft announced it was planning to buy Activision Blizzard for a staggering $68.7 billion. It was one of the biggest deals the gaming industry had ever seen. The controversy, however, showed no signs of slowing down. A couple months later in March, a woman whom I'll be calling Jane filed a lawsuit against the company saying she had reported harassment, but nothing was done about it. Jane described her first day itself as uncomfortable, being pressured to drink alcohol and go along with things just to fit in. Over time, she said it crossed a line into unwanted advances, including being asked for things she never agreed to. But the part that really stuck with people was what happened after she spoke up. She said her complaints were brushed off again and again, and instead of fixing the situation, the company moved her to a different role with less pay. Around the same time in March 2020, the story took a much darker turn. The parents of another woman who I'll be calling Mia, who also worked at Activision Blizzard, filed a lawsuit against the company, saying that the harassment Mia faced at work was a major factor in her decision to end her time on Earth. They described a workplace where things had gone horribly wrong, including another incident where co-workers had shared Mia's private photos without her consent. They also claimed that Mia had been in a relationship with her boss, and that after her death, the company tried to cover parts of it up, even wiping her phone. The parents later dropped the case without explaining why, but the story itself left a lasting impact. In April 2022, a group of workers from Raven Software, the studio that had been protesting earlier, held a vote and decided to unionize, meaning they officially came together to protect their rights and push for better working conditions. And right after that, in June, the company released the results of its own internal investigation, claiming there was no evidence that top executives had hidden misconduct from the board. But by then, so much had already come out publicly that this statement clashed with what many people believed had happened instead of settling the matter. By early 2023, things finally started catching up legally. On February 3rd, the SEC, which is basically a US authority that checks if companies follow rules and protect employees who speak up, made Activision Blizzard pay $35 million. The reason was simple. They didn't properly handle complaints about workplace issues and didn't fully protect people who tried to report them. But all of this didn't stop Microsoft acquiring the company, and in October, Microsoft officially completed its massive buyout of Activision Blizzard. Phil Spencer, the CEO of Xbox, said that the CEO Bobby would stay till the end of the year. By late December, Bobby stepped down just as planned, ending his time at the company. But even then, reports said he left with around $15 million as part of the deal, despite everything that had gone down. If that walkout was massive, what came next was even more serious, involving a situation that went far beyond the workplace.
A controversy is growing over a new video game that allows players to run around inside of a school killing police officers and killing civilians.
It was late May 2018. Ata Berdiev put his latest game on Steam, and at first glance, it looked like just another title in the store, nothing that really stood out. But once people clicked on it and saw what it actually was, it became clear this wasn't just a normal release. Ata Berdiev was a Russian indie developer who, by 2017, had already made a name for himself on Steam, just not in a good way. He was basically running a grind, using ready-made game parts from tools like Unity and some games he didn't own, flipping them into new games and pushing them out fast under titles like BC Interactive and Elusive Team. It required minimal effort, gave quick results, and made easy cash. Although his scheme worked for a while, soon other people started catching on. Since the games all felt the same, complaints about them started piling up. Eventually, Valve, the company behind Steam, decided it had enough. By late 2017, they stepped in and banned Ata from Steam completely. But he didn't stay out for long, because not long after, he pulled a quiet comeback under the new name Revived Games and Acid Publishing Group. After getting back on Steam under new identities, it wasn't long before Ata started his shenanigans again, but this time he took it a step further by pushing out titles like Zuck Simulator, Tide Pod Challenge, and White Powder Pure Voltage that were clearly built to provoke people rather than entertain them. Then, in early 2018, Ata teamed up with another 21-year-old Russian developer, and the two began working on a new first-person game called Active Shooter, which was built around a school shooting scenario. The game was all set to release on June 6, 2018, but as they were preparing for it, no one anticipated what came next. On May 18, 2018, a gunman opened fire in Santa Fe High School in Texas, leaving 8 students dead. And this didn't come out of the blue either, because just a few months earlier in February, one of the deadliest school shootings in US history took place in Stoneman Douglas High School, taking the lives of 17 students and injuring 17 others. So when Acid Publishing Group put Active Shooter up on Steam's store page, less than a month after actual school shootings, it immediately stood out. Its trailer showed scenes inside school classrooms and hallways with people being shot, all packaged as a realistic SWAT simulator. But it didn't take much for people to see what it really was. Then people read the description, and that's when it really hit a nerve. It told players they could be the good guy or the bad guy, which in this case meant stepping into the role of the attacker, moving through a school and shooting civilians, with the game even keeping count of how many students, guards, and officers were killed. It didn't take long for the pushback to kick in. Within days, a UK-based anti-violence group called Infer Trust publicly called on Valve Corporation to shut the game down, pointing out that there had already been over 20 school shootings in the US that year alone, and calling the game out for being completely out of touch with what was actually happening in the real world. And once the store page was out in the open, it started raising eyebrows quickly. Fred Gutenberg, whose daughter Jamie had been killed in the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting earlier that same year, saw it and reacted publicly. He tweeted, "I've seen and heard many horrific things over the past few months since my daughter was the victim of a high school shooting and is now dead in real life. This game may be one of the worst." Jackie Corinne, a survivor from the same Parkland shooting, stepped in and started a change.org petition calling on the Valve Corporation Corporation to take the game down before it ever reached players. In her tweet, she mentioned, "Everyone that cares about school and public safety should be outraged." And because she already had a public voice from that event, the petition picked up fast, spreading across social media and getting picked up by news outlets within hours, turning it into something way bigger than just a community complaint. And as the signatures stacked up, it became clear this wasn't slowing down anytime soon, and before long, the number crossed 100,000. As the petition kept growing, things started moving beyond just players and families and into politics. Elected officials from all major political parties stepped in and publicly called for the game to be removed from Steam. Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick sent a direct letter to Valve Corporation demanding it be taken down, while Florida Senator Bill Nelson also weighed in, saying, "Any company that develops a game like this in the wake of such a horrific tragedy should be ashamed of itself." With the heat building up from all directions, Acid Publishing Group put out a public statement trying to calm things down. They said the game did not promote violence and compared it to other controversial titles like Hatred, Postal, and Carmageddon. They also offered to remove the shooter role before release, although there were no clear details on how or when that would actually happen. But by that point, the pressure from InfoTrust, the petition led by Parkland survivors, and everything surrounding it had already pushed things far beyond that Valve decided to step in and officially investigate both Revived Games and Acid Publishing Group. And that is when they found out that both names were actually tied back to the same person, Ata Berdiev, the same developer they had already permanently banned from Steam the previous year. On May 29th, 2018, Valve Corporation stepped in and removed Active Shooter from Steam completely, just 8 days before it was supposed to launch, cutting off any chance of it being sold or earning money through Steam's system. Valve went a step further and issued a second permanent ban against Ata, this time covering all of his other identities, including Revived Games and Acid Publishing Group. And shortly after, Valve released a public statement calling Ata a troll with a history of abusing customers, using copyrighted material he did not own, and manipulating user reviews. They also made it clear they would not work with developers who behaved that way on their platform, and added that they were reviewing their content rules to prevent situations like this from happening again. On June 6, 2018, the day Active Shooter was supposed to go live, Valve Corporation rolled out a new content policy for Steam, making it clear that even if something did not break the law, it could still be removed if it was clearly made just to provoke people or stir outrage. In the same month, PayPal, an online service that lets people send and receive money over the internet, permanently shut down the account linked to Acid Software, saying it violated their rules, cutting off the main way Ata had been getting paid for his games. So with Steam gone and payments blocked, he tried finding another way in. He turned to Indiegogo, which is a site where people raise money from the public to fund projects, hoping to keep Active Shooter alive that way. But that did not last either, because Indiegogo quickly removed the campaign as well, saying that it violated its policies. Around the same time, a web hosting company called Bluehost, which is basically a service that keeps websites online, stepped in and shut down the websites connected to the game after pressure from a non-profit group called Sandy Hook Promise. That move wiped out the last public place where the game was being promoted. But even after all that, Ata still pushed ahead and released Active Shooter independently, outside of the major platforms. However, without Steam's reach, without payment systems backing it, and without any real platform to promote it, the game never really went anywhere, and slowly faded out of the public eye. Ata's actions showed how intensive one person's behavior could be, but what came next shifted the focus from a single incident to a pattern of leadership inside a major game studio.
I have met the team, and I do care about them a lot. So my initial response to everything was shock, disappointment, heavy disappointment, and I was disappointed.
The year was 2017, and Ubisoft, the company behind hit franchises like Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, had just announced a reboot for Beyond Good and Evil. However, not long after that, it was suddenly hit with a wave of accusations involving toxic workplace behavior. As more complaints began pouring in, one name kept surfacing: Michel Ansel. And in the months that followed, more details emerged about his disturbing behavior in the workplace. Michel Ansel was just 16 when he dropped out of high school to pursue game development and created a demo called Mechanic Warriors for the software house Lancour. In 1989, Ubisoft noticed his work and hired him as a graphic artist when he was 17. In 1992, Michel began developing a character that he conceptualized when he was 17, Rayman. During this time, Ubisoft established a new studio called Ubi Pictures in Montpellier, France, which was headed by Michel and its co-founder, Friedrich Ude. 3 years later, later, in 1995, Michel released Rayman for multiple video game platforms such as PlayStation, Atari Jaguar, and Sega Saturn. The game was a massive success, selling around 400,000 copies in Europe alone. It turned Michel into one of the most celebrated creative figures in the French gaming industry and positioned Ubisoft Montpellier as a major game development studio. 8 years later, in 2003, Michel directed and released Beyond Good and Evil for PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube, and Windows. Although it wasn't a commercial success on its release, it received praise from critics and developed a cult-like following over the years. Michel knew that the game hadn't lived up to its true potential and so later spoke about wanting to revisit it. He started working on the sequel, and 5 years later, on May 28, 2008, at Ubisoft's Ubi Days event, a teaser trailer for Beyond Good and Evil 2 was announced. The reveal generated a lot of excitement among fans who were eagerly waiting for the project to release. However, after that, the project went quiet for almost a decade, with no development updates released to the public. In the meantime, in July 2014, Michel, who had become the creative director at Ubisoft Montpellier, co-founded an independent studio called Wild Sheep, where he started working on an open-world survival game called Wild. By now, he was splitting his time working with two companies on two major projects. On June 12, 2017, Beyond Good and Evil, BGE 2, was officially re-revealed to the public, with another teaser trailer being shown at the Electronic Entertainment Expo, or E3, which is like Comic-Con but for video games. Michel took the stage to thank fans for their support and announced that development on the game would begin fresh. But behind these promises were the employees at Ubisoft, many of whom were enduring a toxic workplace. By 2017, many complaints about Michel's management had been submitted to the Ubisoft leadership. However, these early complaints weren't addressed because Michel was a close friend of Ubisoft's CEO, Yves Guillemot. Over the next few years, employees on the Beyond Good and Evil 2 team reported being burnt out and depressed. An old Ubisoft employee told journalists,
"I've seen a good dozen people go on sick leave. Probably more. Meeting people with tears in their eyes, it happens often."
And another employee said,
"He's capable of explaining to you that you're a genius, that your idea is wonderful, then to dismantle you in a meeting, saying you're nothing but dirt, that your work is worth nothing, and not speak to you for a month."
On top of that, Michel's simultaneous work on Wild led to the disorganized development of BGE 2. Since Michel was working only part-time in the development of the game, he would often leave the Ubisoft team without consistent leadership or clear direction for long periods of time. He would also constantly change the creative vision and often ordered full restarts on the project. Days, weeks, sometimes months of work would be wiped out in a single meeting, which was a big part of why the game kept getting delayed. At one point, employees became so frustrated with Michel's behavior that the company had no choice but to intervene, and it placed extra managers between him and his developers. Even then, conditions inside the company kept getting worse, while Yves continued to protect Michel's position. But then, in late 2020, allegations of intimate misconduct and toxic workplace behavior began to surface, where senior-level executives were accused of bullying and harassing female employees. On July 11, 2020, Ubisoft announced that Chief Creative Officer Serge Haskowit, the Canadian studio head Yanis Malay, and HR executive Cecile Cornet had all resigned. This finally created an opportunity for the employees whose previous complaints on Michel had been ignored to bring forth their concerns once again. And this time, Ubisoft didn't take the matter lightly, with Yves publicly stating that every allegation would be thoroughly investigated and that no one would be exempt from it, including Michel. In early August 2020, Yves personally informed Michel that the company had opened a formal investigation on him, but despite the investigation, Yves reportedly pushed to keep Michel on the project. A month later, September 18th, 2020, Michel was called in for an interview with investigators at Ubisoft, which reportedly went on for hours. Shortly after that session, Michel made a post on Instagram announcing that he was leaving the video game industry entirely after more than 30 years, stating his desire to pursue wildlife conservation. To many, this came out of nowhere. On the same day, Ubisoft confirmed Michel's exit from the company, assuring that BGE 2's development would continue under new leadership. However, there was no mention of the investigation against him. A week later, the French newspaper Libération published its full report on the investigation. The article finally revealed Michel's history of abusive behavior, connecting it directly to the troubled development of BGE 2. They also revealed that Michel had left Ubisoft because of the investigation into his toxic behavior. The evening the article was released, Michel took to Instagram with a lengthy response to the same. He denied all allegations made against him, calling the article fake news, and insisted that he had always worked with respect for his team. Later, he sat down for an interview with The Liberation, where he denied being responsible for managing the team and claimed he was unaware that the team felt the way they described. He also suggested that burnout was an inherent and unavoidable part of working on such ambitious projects. In the interview, he said,
"You have to consider the context of such a creation. Its ambition, its complexity."
Since then, BGE 2 has remained in development at Ubisoft without him, and years after that scandal, the game still hasn't been released. In October 2024, Ubisoft announced that Michel was being brought back as a consultant on a new, untitled Rayman project, which was being developed by Ubisoft Montpellier and Ubisoft Milan. The announcement surprised many people who had followed the abuse allegations, and one Redditor user put it plainly.
"I think it's a man who don't want to change, and who became unsuitable with today's industry. I think it's a man better suited for smaller teams surrounded by devotees. I think he's lost, and I don't trust his judgment anymore."
This case showed how leadership can affect an entire studio, but what came next focused on one person, as a Ubisoft director's hidden personal life became the center of controversy.
Danny came forward about Ashraf Ismail, saying that he had an on and off relationship with her, but she did not know that he was actually married at the time. So Ashraf was dating her while having a family at home.
It was June 2020, and Ubisoft was preparing for one of the biggest game launches in the world. Assassin's Creed Valhalla had just been revealed, fans were excited, and standing at the center of it all was Ashraf Ismail, the respected director behind some of the series' most beloved games. But while Ubisoft was building hype for its next blockbuster, someone from Ashraf's past was getting ready to expose a very different side of him. Ashraf Ismail began his game development journey at Ubisoft Montreal, one of the studios behind the hugely popular Assassin's Creed series. He joined the company in 2009 as a developer, starting out behind the scenes and slowly building a reputation for his work. That all changed on October 29, 2013, when Assassin's Creed 4 Black Flag released worldwide with Ashraf as the game director. The game was a huge success, selling over 11 million copies worldwide within the first year. It helped bring new life to the franchise, turning Ashraf into one of Ubisoft's most respected developers and a fan favorite. In June 2017, Ashraf attended the Electronics Entertainment Expo, better known as E3, to promote his next game, Assassin's Creed Origins. While at the Ubisoft booth, he noticed a Twitch streamer named Danny Porter Bridges and approached her after spotting her tattoo, even though she had no idea who he was at the time. Shortly after that meeting, the two got into a relationship. A few months later, in October 2017, Assassin's Creed Origins was released worldwide with Ashraf as its game director. The game was a huge success, even outselling the previous installment, and it marked the peak of his career. By this point, he had firmly established himself as one of the key creative forces behind the franchise. But while everything seemed to be going right in his professional life, there were things in his personal life that he was keeping hidden. Ashraf and Danny had been in a relationship for almost a year at this point, but even as they got closer, something felt off. Ashraf would avoid phone calls, never agree to video chats, and stayed away from anything that could connect back to his home. Then one day, Danny noticed something strange. During a press appearance, Ashraf was wearing a wedding ring. When she confronted him, he brushed it off, saying it was just cultural, something he wore out of respect for his family, not because he was actually married. But the doubt didn't go away, and so Danny started looking into it herself, and what she found changed everything. Through multiple sources, she found that Ashraf was a married man, and the entire time they were together, he had a wife and children at home. She immediately confronted him and yelled at him before breaking things off with him. At the same time, even as things in his personal life were falling apart, Ashraf's career seemed stronger than ever. On April 29, 2020, Ubisoft revealed Assassin's Creed Valhalla during a livestream, with Ashraf introduced as the creative director. He was front and center in interviews, praised by fans, and seen as the face of one of the company's biggest upcoming games. But that image didn't last long. Because on June 21st, 2020, Danny posted screenshots of her conversations with Ashraf, warning other women that he was married and had been lying to her the entire time.
This person is married. When he starts a relationship with you, know he's married. This is why he doesn't want to talk on phone or FaceTime or have things sent to his home.
What started as one post quickly turned into something much bigger. In the days that followed, more women came forward with similar stories, and some of them were Ubisoft employees, and all of them pointed to a pattern that was becoming impossible to ignore. The pressure kept building, and it didn't take long for things to reach a breaking point. On June 24th, 2020, Ashraf posted a message on Twitter saying,
"I'm stepping down from my beloved project to properly deal with the personal issues in my life. The lives of my family and my own are shattered. I'm deeply sorry to everyone hurt in this."
Soon after, he deleted his entire account. That same day, Ubisoft confirmed he had been placed on leave as the allegations were being looked into, but they did not say what would happen next. Just over a week later, on July 2nd, the company's CEO, Yves Guillemot, announced plans to make major changes inside Ubisoft to improve workplace culture as more reports continued to surface. By mid-August 2020, the situation had reached its conclusion. Reports from Kotaku revealed that after an internal investigation by an external firm, Ashraf had been officially fired from Ubisoft, though the details were never made public. As the company tried to deal with the fallout, the CEO issued a public apology ahead of a major September event, admitting that Ubisoft had failed to provide a safe workplace. In November 2020, Assassin's Creed Valhalla was finally released, but this time, Ashraf's name was nowhere to be found in the credits, making a quiet but final end to his involvement in the project he had spent years building. For a while, it seemed like Ashraf had completely disappeared from the industry, but behind the scenes, that wasn't entirely true. In 2021, Tencent, the Chinese video game publishing company behind Call of Duty Mobile, quietly opened a new studio in Montreal under Timi Studios Group. But what was surprising was that without any public announcement, Ashraf had started working there from day one, back in a senior role as if he had never really left the industry at all. At first, no one knew, and it wasn't until July 2022, when journalist Stefan Totilo reported on it, that people realized he had been back in a senior role the whole time, and that's when the backlash picked up again. Around the same time, a workers' rights group called A Better Ubisoft had formed inside Ubisoft, and they didn't stay quiet. They spoke out, with many people questioning how he managed to return so quietly after everything that had happened. In February 2026, the Timi Montreal studio shut down without releasing a single game, and just like that, Ashraf's last known role in the gaming industry came to an end. This case focused on one person's hidden personal life, but what came next involved far more serious accusations, as multiple women came forward against a studio's former CEO.
He is a liar and a predator, and what has come out so far is a fraction of the truth that the damage he has done.
Alexis Kennedy was a well-respected name in the independent gaming industry, but in August 2019, all of that would change when his name began exploding across social media alongside accusations that would follow him for years to come. According to multiple women, he was not the person he presented himself to be, and they began sharing what had happened behind the closed doors of his company. Alex Kennedy was 39 years old when he co-founded Fail Better Games, a video game development studio in London alongside Paul Arunt. Alexis served as the company's chief narrative officer and its chief executive, which meant that every writer, editor, and creative staff member the studio hired would be managed directly under him. In the same year, Fail Better launched Fallen London, a free-to-play Victorian text-adventure browser game. The game received many positive reviews, with one calling it one of the best browser games they've ever played, praising its compelling story. Over the years, it developed a cult-like following which established Alexis as a highly regarded figure in the independent narrative game scene. 4 years later, in 2013, Fail Better launched a Kickstarter campaign for its new survival game, Sunless Sea, and raised over $100,000 in crowdfunding. Kickstarter is a site where developers pitch their ideas directly to the public, and people can choose to fund the project if they want to see it made. During this campaign, the company hired many freelance writers to contribute to the game. 2 years later, on February 6, 2015, Sunless Sea was released for Windows and Mac OS. The game was hailed by critics, elevating Alexis' name in the industry and making him the most sought-after narrative designer across the UK and internationally. About a year later, in 2016, Alexis left Fail Better Games after 7 years, stating in a blog post that he wanted to work on creative work that he loved rather than running a company. In the following months, he took high-profile freelance contracts which included writing for Paradox's Stellaris and BioWare. A year later, in 2017, he and his partner, Lottie Bevan, founded Weather Factory, an independent micro studio based in London. The studio pushed boundaries by focusing on experimental narrative games. During this time, Alexis also launched a public mentorship program, offering guidance to independent developers looking to enter into the industry. In May 2018, Weather Factory released its first game ever, Cultist Simulator. The card-based simulation game earned strong reviews and later received 2 BAFTA nominations. In case you don't know, the British Academy Film Awards is an annual film award show hosted by the British Academy of Film and Television Arts to honour the best British and international film contributions. By then, Alexis had proven himself a success both critically and commercially, making many younger newcomers eager to work under his mentorship. However, behind the scenes, something much darker was going on. In August 2019, an anonymous Twitter account named Abuse Industry started naming people it claimed were abusers in the video game industry, and one of those names was Alexis Kennedy. One of these posts said,
"If you're a woman in the industry and AK has invited you over for cocktails, put your hand up."
Shortly after making these posts, the account disappeared, leaving many people unsure of whether these claims were true. But the post stayed online long enough for other women who said they had been harmed by Alexis to start speaking out. Following the tweets, on August 28, 2019, a 32-year-old narrative designer, Meghana Jayanth, posted a lengthy thread on Twitter calling Alexis a
well-known predator in the games industry
who had been targeting young women for years. Meghana, who had worked as a freelance writer on Sunless Sea, stated that Alexis had personally targeted her when she first approached him as a young woman looking for career advice and professional work. She also explained how Alexis would befriend young women who were trying to enter the industry and that he would then cross professional boundaries with them. And because he held power, he used money and reputation threats to keep them silent. She said,
"Many of the women he had hurt before were too afraid to come forward because of how he had gone after people who spoke out."
Within hours of Meghana's thread, Olivia Wood, another writer and editor at Fail Better, shared her own first-hand story of what happened. She revealed that when Alexis was her line manager, she had been in a relationship with him for nearly 2 years, which was kept secret from the entire company. She also said that during this relationship, Alexis would often cheat on her with other women he brought to the company events who worked under him. She later broke up with him and requested to change him as her manager. But after that, the way Alexis treated her changed. He shouted at her in front of colleagues and belittled her work, making her feel that leaving the company was the only option left. He also made sure that she would no longer get any work across the industry. On the very same day, Emily Short, who was the chief product officer of Spirit AI, who was a freelancer at Fail Better Games before, also accused Alexis of acting inappropriately towards her. However, replying to the posts, Alexis denied all allegations made against him and stated that they were malicious misinterpretation and that he had filed a police complaint for what he called a campaign of harassment. His fiancée, Lottie Bevan, also came to his defense against the allegations online, but under UK law, defamation is treated as a civil issue, meaning it's handled between people in court rather than as a crime, so the police couldn't step in or take action. On August 28th and 29th, 2019, Fail Better Games published a tweet saying,
"We believe and stand with everyone who has come to speak against Alexis tonight."
After posting that statement, they made it clear they wanted to fully distance themselves from Alexis and reassure people that he no longer had any connection to the studio in any way. They also went on to say,
"This sort of behavior has no place in our industry or in any other."
Within 48 hours of these allegations going public, multiple mentorship partners in Weather Factory's own mentorship program withdrew. These included indie studios such as Small Island Games and Space Backyard, and developer Nikhil Murthy. In mid-September 2019, Alexis published a lengthy blog post on the Weather Factory website titled What Actually Happened. In it, he admitted that he was, in fact, in a secret relationship with Olivia and that it was a serious error of judgment on his part. But he denied all other accusations of predatory behavior and insisted that this was a malicious attempt at defaming him. After the wave of allegations, Weather Factory suffered a huge blow to its reputation, which directly affected the network it had built over the years, as well as the studio's credibility compared to other independent studios. Alexis and Lottie's mental health also suffered a great deal throughout the years 2019 and 2020. In July 2021, almost 2 years after the allegations, Alexis published an open letter accusing Fail Better Games of being behind the defamation campaign against him. He also raised the fact that he still had ownership of the company due to a loophole and threatened to take legal action against it. Another year later, in June 2022, Alexis and Lottie published the Fail Better report, which was a data-driven analysis of the loss they suffered due to the Twitter campaign against Alexis. In it, they claimed that the jobs they lost cost the company around $1 million, £800,000. However, since the report was commissioned by Alexis and Lottie, it was assumed to be biased by people. On August 17, 2023, about 4 years after the controversy, Weather Factory released Book of Hours, a narrative crafting RPG set in an occult library. The game's release confirmed that Alexis had continued working and building an audience despite the controversy surrounding him in 2019. 2 months later, on October 1st, 2023, Failbetter Games made a post on Twitter saying that it and Alexis had settled their differences by coming to a mutual agreement. It made a post on Twitter saying,
Failbetter and Alexis Kennedy are excited to return their full attention to making games that people love.
However, while the allegations about his pattern of behavior remained part of the public record, they never led to any formal legal conclusion. That case involved serious accusations from multiple people, but what came next shifted to public confrontation, as the developer's actions led to a physical clash with police at an event.
Yes! Sim Builder's fighting the cops. Sim Builder's fighting the fucking Sim Builder's fighting the police. Sim Builder's fighting the...
On September 9th, 2023, hundreds of people arrived at the Fort Mason Center for Arts and Culture in San Francisco for the Roblox Developers Conference, expecting a day of announcement and celebration. Instead, before many had even made it inside, they were met with a shocking scene unfolding outside the venue. A man was being wrestled to the ground by several police officers, thrashing and trying to break free. Then people in the crowd looked closer and realized this wasn't just anyone. It was Mikael, otherwise known as Sim Builder, who is one of the biggest names in the Roblox community. Mikael Jacob Olsen was born on the 19th of April, 1998 in Tucson, Arizona. He first joined Roblox under the name Sim Builder on September 19th, 2008. Since then, he learned and started developing experiences, which if you don't know, are like games inside Roblox where other players can socialize, learn, and play together. On August 10th, 2014, Mikael launched an experience called Vehicle Simulator, which allows players to drive around in different vehicles, including cars, planes, and boats. Over the years, it became a huge success in the Roblox community because of its high-quality graphics and realistic physics, making him a highly regarded developer for Roblox. 2 years later in 2016, Mikael founded Summit Studios, a creative studio focused on expanding Vehicle Simulator and other Roblox projects. By 2023, he was also using the studio to promote AI-based customer service systems designed in Roblox Studio and described himself as a metaverse creator on his online profiles. On March 14, 2023, Roblox announced that the 2023 Innovation Awards would take place alongside that year's Roblox Developers Conference. The two-day event was scheduled for September 8th and 9th, 2023 at the Fort Mason Center for Arts and Culture in San Francisco. It was set to run from Friday to Saturday, with the awards ceremony planned for Saturday evening. On September 8th, 2023, the day of the event, everything went according to schedule with no hiccups. However, on the afternoon of the second day at around 2:15 p.m., as the awards ceremony was about to start, park police were notified of a security concern that was posted online. Officers were put on alert as they tried to check for suspicious activity in the area. Later that day, park police were alerted to a man behaving suspiciously during the conference. That man was Mikael, who was attempting to enter the awards presentation taking place inside. Officers stopped him, and when they approached to question him, he attacked them. As he fought with the police, bystanders witnessed the scene and recognized him as Sim Builder.
Sim Builder's fighting the cops. Sim Builder's fighting the fucking Sim Builder's fighting the police. Sim Builder's fighting the...
The police soon got hold of him and arrested him. Upon his arrest, Mikael later told the officers that he had a firearm inside his car. On his arrest, he was charged with having 2 guns and concealing a firearm in a vehicle and possessing a large quantity of ammunition. Later that day, Roblox decided to cancel the awards ceremony shortly before it was about to start and postponed the event. The next day, Roblox posted on Twitter that it was working with authorities to ensure everyone's safety, adding that it was not how they wanted the RDC to end. On September 19th, 2023, Sim Builder was terminated from Roblox, meaning his developer account was removed and he could no longer access the platform. Reports indicate that Mikael has not been active on Roblox since his arrest. While Roblox has never publicly confirmed the reason for the termination, many believe it was tied to the events at RDC 2023. A month later, on October 24th, 2023, Roblox announced that the postponed awards ceremony would return on November 10th, 2023, this time as a virtual event hosted directly on the Roblox platform. Mikael's actions played out in public, but this next case centers on a developer's private actions involving a...
I'm not a danger to...
On September 25th, 2023, a video started exploding across the internet. It featured leaked audio recordings with private messages that allegedly showed Yandere Dev engaging in deeply inappropriate conversations with a significantly younger fan, leaving viewers stunned as the details spread online. As thousands rushed to see the evidence for themselves, outrage grew rapidly, and the empire he'd spent 10 years building began collapsing in a matter of hours. Yandere Dev is the online handle of Alex Muhan, an independent game developer from Temecula, California, who began his career as a junior game designer in Kung Fu Factory. In March 2014, Alex posted the idea for his schoolgirl serial killer simulator on 4chan, an online forum where people talked about anime, video games, sports, and politics. The concept received strong positive feedback, so Alex quickly began turning it into a real game. The first playable version launched in April 2014 and was called Yandere Simulator. It was a simulation game where players could explore the world and interact with different characters. One feature allowed players to earn points by taking photos of schoolgirls' undergarments. Although all of the characters were officially labeled as 18, they were designed to look and act like high school students. The game soon became hugely popular on YouTube, where many creators played it and shared videos. Alex also regularly posted updates, showed bug fixes, and interacted with fans through community polls and feedback that helped it gain a strong cult following. Despite the game's success, Twitch, a streaming platform for games, added it to its list of prohibited games without publicly explaining any reason. By 2016, Yandere Simulator had built a huge online following, especially among teenagers and younger viewers who discovered the game through YouTube. Wanting to work on the project full-time, Alex opened a Patreon account, where fans sent him money each month to support development. But as the game grew more popular, cracks were beginning to show. When Skullgirls programmer Mike Zaymont criticized the poor quality of Alex's code, Alex left the 4chan community where he had first shared the game idea, only returning later to insult its members. In March 2017, Alex partnered with publisher TinyBuild, which planned to help improve and release the game. It looks like a major step forward, but behind the scenes, problems quickly surfaced. Because TinyBuild's programmer reportedly clashed with Alex over the game's messy and deeply flawed code, and by December 2017, the partnership had completely fallen apart. During this time, an anonymous person posted chats from as far back as 2009 with Eva Zephan, which was Alex's previous online persona. The chats showed that Alex engaged in manipulative and inappropriately suggestive communication with a known as Sessif. He used his position in the gaming community to gain an upper hand. More evidence surfaced about Alex later that showed him talking to an extremely young person about puberty. Another post on Tumblr said that Alex had made an underage girl undress and perform inappropriate acts over the webcam. He later banned her from the community and started spreading lies about her. On August 1st, 2023, YouTuber Pixels After Dark uploaded a video how Yandere Dev profited off his predator allegations, which explored years of concerns surrounding Alex's behavior. The video gained more than 100,000 views within 2 months and brought the controversy to a much wider audience. Around the same time, Alex had begun privately talking with a Yandere Simulator fan who used the name Jane. Their conversations took place on Discord and Snapchat, where he used an account called Cosplay Fan. This fan, however, was years old at the time, something that Alex later admitted he knew during their first voice chat. And even though he was 35, almost 20 years older than her, he continued speaking with her. Over time, the conversations became explicit. Alex would constantly steer the conversation toward inappropriate topics, including body measurements. He also made comments defending attraction based on puberty, making the entire interaction even more disturbing. During this time, one of Jane's friends, Ali McSee, who was also a YouTuber and a gamer, noticed how Jane was being taken advantage of and told her to put an end to it immediately. But when Jane confronted Alex about it, he responded by calling himself a lonely, vulnerable man who made the mistake of being flirty to a girl who was a bit too young. He also claimed that Jane was abusing him since she had power over him as a Jane agreed and told Alex that she would ask her friend not to share her recordings. However, when she did try to do so, Ali McSee refused to stay silent. Despite Jane's request, Ali McSee began preparing to release the audio recordings publicly. When Jane conveyed this to Alex, he started teaching her about what to say to defend him. On September 25th, 2023, Ali McSee posted a video on YouTube that contained masked audio recordings and chat logs of Jane being taken advantage of by Alex. But since the video mentions Jane's real legal name, it was quickly taken down by YouTube due to copyright issues to protect her real identity. Despite this, a copy of the video continued to circulate online. On the same day of the video surfaced, Alex published a post on the Yandere Simulator development blog titled, "I'm sorry." In it, he admitted to having inappropriate interactions with, and he called his actions a stupid mistake. He also added that he would donate $1,000 to RAIN, which is an anti-abuse organization, and the backlash he received was immediate. Michaela Laws, the voice actress and voice director for the main character, Yandere-chan, announced on X that she was suspending her involvement with the game after nearly a decade of supporting the project. After Michaela Laws, many others, including voice actors, developers, and volunteers, began leaving Yandere Simulator one after another, leaving the project with very few people still working on it. Years of recorded lines and community work suddenly had to be replaced. The game was also losing the YouTubers who helped make it famous. On September 26, 2023, popular gaming YouTuber Bijou Mike uploaded a video explaining why he was stepping away from the project and cutting all ties with Alex and the game.
Hey guys, so you may be confused, I uploaded a video earlier saying that I'm gonna be quitting Yandere Simulator. That is still true.
The video gained more than 35,000 views within its first 4 hours. Another YouTuber, Cub Scouts J, whose videos on the game had been watched by millions, said he would no longer make videos promoting Yandere Simulator. With creators stepping back, the game lost one of its biggest ways of reaching new people. Then, on October 30th, 2023, Twitch banned Yandere Dev from the platform. The company did not explain why or how long the ban would last, but many people noticed it happened about a month after the allegations became public. However, Alex's YouTube, Twitter, Patreon accounts continued to be active. On January 1st, 2024, Alex uploaded a 15-minute video to YouTube in an attempt to address the allegations on him. In it, he admitted he had inappropriate conversations with Jane while knowing she was 16, but insisted he had not intentionally tried to take advantage of her.
A normal, mentally healthy adult would have just blocked the girl immediately after the very first time she said something inappropriate. But I didn't. And having to face that fact was a wake-up call that made me realize I had deteriorated mentally.
This video was later deleted, but by then, the damage had already been done. Copies of the video quickly spread online and were watched by tens of thousands of people. Many people did not accept that explanation, saying he was trying to shift the blame instead of taking full responsibility. Yandere Simulator, once one of YouTube's biggest indie game sensations, had almost ground to a stop. As of late 2023 and 2024, the development of the game had almost stopped, with Alex working alone after losing years of voice work, volunteer support, and much of the online attention that had kept the project alive. That case centered on Alex's private actions involving a... But what came next went even further, involving a game built around disturbing actions towards...
Alec has just been sentenced for creating a abuse video game with over 850,000 subscribers.
Online gaming is a billion-dollar industry built on one simple idea. Give people something they can't stop playing. Alec West saw that formula and decided to apply it to something far darker. Alex Stephen West was born and raised in Australia, where he lived with his wife and child in the suburb of Highton, Victoria. Around 2020, Alec began developing an online game for paying subscribers. The game's name was never publicly disclosed, but we do know that it was hosted on 2 websites and featured animated characters depicted as being harmed. The game also had a rule built into it. If a player refused to participate in the harm, they lost and the game ended, encouraging players to indulge in these activities. Alec would push out updates for the game every 2 months. He even released special editions at Christmas and Halloween to keep the subscribers hooked. In May 2023, the Australian Border Force uncovered information about an online child exploitation game and passed it to police, launching what would become a first-of-its-kind investigation. The case was handed to the Victorian Joint Anti-Child Exploitation Team, JACET, a special child exploitation task force. Australian Federal Police undercover officers also moved online to help build the case. But before the police could knock on Alec's door with the warrants, they made sure Alec had nowhere to run financially. A day before the raid, the Australian Federal Police got a court order to freeze all of Alec's assets, so nothing could be moved or hidden. Then on August 2nd, 2023, officers arrived at Alec's home in Highton and arrested him. When they began searching the house, what they found out was even more shocking. The electronic devices that Alec owned contained more than 140,000 exploitation files linked to the game. When the detectives questioned him, Alec gave a response that only made the case more disturbing. He said that he had simply
found a gap in the market and exploited it.
The police also seized 2 vehicles, high-end TVs and audio equipment, furniture and appliances, which were all items bought from the money Alec had made from the operation. Alec was charged with multiple offenses for possessing, controlling, and producing harm material. In May 2024, he pleaded guilty to 14 of those charges. Later, a psychologist assessed Alec and said he showed signs of being inappropriately attached to little humans. In late March 2025, the court ordered Alec to pay back approximately $530,000, 850,000 Australian dollars, after investigators accounted for all the profits he had earned through the game. Then, on April 1st, 2025, Alec appeared on a screen from his prison cell, watching his own sentencing play out over a video call. Judge Jared Milorli called what he did
abhorrent
before addressing Alec directly.
Your intimate depiction of and normalization of family relations reveals a dark aspect of your character.
Alec was sentenced to 11 years and 7 months in prison, out of which he must spend at least 8 years and 4 months behind bars before he can apply for release. The court also took all of his seized assets, including money from the sale of 2 vehicles. That money was ordered to be used for crime prevention programs and law enforcement across Australia. But although the game is gone, investigators have never publicly confirmed whether every subscriber was identified or what they went on to do. Alec built a game around disturbing actions toward. But what came next centered on the developer himself, as serious evidence involving came to light.
The Louisiana Attorney General filing a lawsuit late today against the popular online gaming app Roblox. She calls it a hotbed for predators.
Roblox is a hugely popular online platform where millions of people play games made by users themselves, with everything from simple obstacle courses to massive virtual worlds, and it's especially popular with children and teenagers, with over 164 million monthly active users worldwide. So when people came to know that one of the developers behind the games on the platform was hiding disturbing secrets linked to child exploitation, it sent shockwaves through the community. This is Jamie Bourne, a 30-year-old independent game developer from New Orleans, who created countless games that featured the Roblox platform. On March 1st, 2023, Jamie attacked a couple living in a tent on a New Orleans street. He threw a smoke grenade and an airsoft grenade before opening fire with a pistol while shouting racial slurs at them. He was arrested on the spot and spent 2 days in jail. After that, a bond of $36,000 was set, meaning he had to pay that amount to be released while the case continued. Shortly after, he was released on parole, meaning probation officers would carry out occasional compliance checks to monitor his behavior and make sure he was staying out of trouble. On February 25th, 2026, probation officers were doing just another routine check to make sure everything was in line at Jamie's home in St. Andrew Street, New Orleans, when they came across a sized inappropriate doll lying in his bedroom. When the officers questioned Jamie about the doll, he said that he
had it imported directly from China
and repeatedly claimed that he was
very lonely.
The probation officers quickly called in Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, and the Louisiana State Police to bring in more officers and take the investigation further. 2 days later, a member of the Attorney General's Internet Crimes Against Children task force accompanied them to the home. When she reached there, she observed that the doll looked like a very little human and was dressed in a onesie commonly worn by little humans. She also noticed that several inappropriate items and toys were lying beside it, but that wasn't all. Digital forensics investigators then arrived with a search warrant and seized multiple electronic devices, including hard drives, laptops, and phones. After examining the drives, they discovered inappropriate material involving very little humans. On March 17th, 2026, Jamie was arrested for owning harm material and the doll. He was then taken to Orleans Parish Jail, where the court set the amount of money he had to pay to be released while the case was ongoing. It was $50,000 for the charge involving the physical item and $2 million for the charges related to the illegal digital material. But even if he had somehow managed to pay the bond, authorities kept him in custody because he was already on probation for an earlier case involving firing a gun illegally. In other words, Jamie was not leaving jail anytime soon. Then on March 19th, 2026, Louisiana Attorney General Liz Muriel made a post on X, publicly sharing the charges against Jamie and stating that
the criminal division was prosecuting the case.
In the same post, she described him as a
Roblox programmer.
However, Roblox pushed back on that claim, saying Jamie had never worked for the company. A spokesperson said that Roblox allows independent users who are not affiliated with the company to create experiences on the platform, all of which are expected to follow its community standards. The comments came months after Liz had already announced a lawsuit against Roblox in August 2025, alleging that the platform's lack of minimum age requirements allowed PDFs to pose as and interact with. As of March 2026, 7 US states, including Louisiana, have joined in support of the case. This case centered on a developer and serious allegations, but the next case shifts in a completely different direction, as a well-known creator's story tragically ended.
Like, it could have happened, could have easily have happened, because this is quite f***ed up.
On August 27, 2019, a long thread appeared on Twitter accusing one of indie gaming's most respected creators of harm that had been kept secret for years. Within a day, his own teammates cut ties with him. Collaborators began sharing their own experiences, and the developer behind one of the most beloved indie games suddenly disappeared from public view. Just 4 days later, the story took a turn no one was prepared for, leaving the entire industry shaken and divided over what had happened. Alec Holoka was born on October 30th, 1983 in Winnipeg, Canada, and grew up in a quiet neighborhood called East Caledonan. When he was just 8 years old, his dad handed him a programming book called Basic Fun, which sparked his interest in video game development. In the early 2000s, Alec joined a small freeware group and started working on games, moving from one project to another. Some were in Winnipeg, others in Vancouver, and none of them really worked out. Then, in 2006, while working as a sound engineer on a small indie game, something unexpected happened. Through a random comment section online, Alec connected with another developer named Derek Yu. It didn't seem like a big deal at first, just two people talking on the internet. But soon, that random online connection with Derek turned out to be the break Alec had been waiting for, as soon they both started working together on a project. And so on December 7th, 2007, the two released their game, Aquaria, through their small studio BitBlot. It was an underwater exploration game, and almost overnight, it blew up. It went on to win the top prize at the Independent Games Festival, putting Alec on the map as someone people needed to pay attention to. From the outside, things looked like they were finally working out. Alec even spoke openly about his struggles with mental health, and a lot of people respected him for that. But behind the scenes, something else was going on entirely. People close to him had already started noticing a different side, one that was unpredictable and difficult to deal with, and it was beginning to affect the people around him. In early 2012, Alec got in touch with indie game developer Zoe Quinn, who moved in the same online circles of game creators as he did. They ended up talking for hours on Skype, and somewhere along the way, things shifted from just chatting about games to something more personal. When they mentioned they were going through a rough time, he invited them to stay with him in Winnipeg, even pointing out how cheap and easy the trip would be. So Zoe packed their bags and traveled from Toronto to Winnipeg. From Alec's perspective, it didn't feel complicated. They were already talking a lot. There was a bit of a connection, and he thought he was just offering them a place to stay and a break from everything for a while, especially since he had told them not to worry about the return trip and promised to cover their ticket home. But what seemed like a simple invitation at the time would later take on a very different meaning once more details about that visit came to light, but more on that in a bit. In June 2013, Scott Benson was working as a freelancer animator in Pittsburgh, trying to make ends meet and get his work noticed, when, out of nowhere, he got a message from Alec. He had come across his animations online and had an idea. Why not make a game together? They got on a call that same night and started discussing possibilities of collaborating, and within a few months, they were working side by side on a game. On October 22nd, 2013, they decided to show the world what they had been building when they launched a Kickstarter for their indie game, Night in the Woods, with a goal of $50,000, not really knowing where it would go. But almost right away, things started to take off and the goal was hit in just 26 hours, and by the end of the campaign, they had raised over $209,000. And with that kind of support, the project grew fast. That's when a video game writer, Bethany Hockenberry, officially came on board, turning a small idea between two people into a much larger game. But for everyone working with Alec, things didn't seem so smooth. According to Scott, there were stretches where Alec would completely disappear. Messages would go unanswered, work would stall, and then he would suddenly reappear like nothing had happened, ready to jump back into things. At the GDC 2014, which stands for Game Developers Conference, which is a major yearly industry event where game creators meet, showcase projects, and give talks, things boiled over in public when Alec lashed out on social media, snapping at people online in a way that caught attention across the community. Later, he told Scott he'd been drinking alcohol, walking alone through the streets of San Francisco, and said he might just keep going until something happened to him. Scott later described it as trying to keep a project alive while feeling like something unstable could happen at any moment. By the next year's GDC in 2015, the situation escalated again. Over several days at the event, Alec reportedly went through a severe breakdown. Things became intense enough that people around him felt unsafe, and he made threats about unaliving himself if Scott didn't step in and fix what was going wrong. Not long after that, Alec was asked to leave the place he was staying in Vancouver, a city in Canada, since the people living with him no longer felt comfortable having him there. At this point, Scott decided that after this he would never work with Alec ever again. Then, in late December 2015, Bethany posted a public series of tweets venting about the internal problems with the Night in the Woods team, and although it was not meant for a wide audience, it was still quickly seen by others in the industry. Once it was out in the open, Alec acknowledged what had been going on and pulled back from the situation. But that pause didn't last long, and within about a week, he was back on the project. In 2016, he began therapy and started cognitive behavioral exercises, which are structured techniques used to help people recognize and change patterns of thinking and behavior. Things started to look more stable again, and he appeared to be in a very different place than before. That version of stability carried into the release of Night in the Woods on February 21st, 2017, when the game finally launched on PC, Mac, Linux, and PlayStation 4 after being delayed from its original January 10th release date. It was a story-driven game about mental health, depression, and life in a small town, and it connected with players almost immediately, earning strong critical praise and emotional responses from a wide audience. Over the next 2 years, the game kept gaining recognition and picking up major awards across the industry, including the BAFTA Award for Narrative, turning it into one of the standout indie successes of its time. But even as the game was being celebrated on stage and in reviews, there were people connected to its development who were dealing with something else entirely. On August 26, 2019, a game developer Natalie Lawhead published a public post sharing how composer Jeremy Soule used to harm her. The post spread quickly, far beyond one person or one story, and what followed was described by journalists as a broader Me Too moment in gaming, where more people began speaking out about experiences they had kept quiet for years. The very next day, Zoe, the developer who had moved to Winnipeg back in 2012, published a long thread on Twitter to share their side of their story. They accused Alec of harming them and keeping them in his house against their will and not letting them leave freely during that time. In the post, they said,
"I spent a lot of that month hiding from him in the bathroom. His moods would shift and he'd throw things and hurt himself seemingly at random and blame me."
They wrote that Alec had promised to cover their flight back after the trip, but once they arrived, that promise was never followed through. Feeling stuck, they eventually reached out to a friend to help pay for their return tickets so they could leave. After getting back home, they sent him a short, polite email ending the relationship. Upon receiving the email, Alec lashed out at them and banned them from the indie games community before later banning himself. The next day, August 28th, the people behind Night in the Woods responded to the allegations publicly. Scott and Bethany announced that they were cutting all ties with Alec and also cancelled a project that they were working on at the time, while putting planned physical releases on hold. Their publisher, Finji, supported the decision and paused production as well. On the same day, another developer, Albertine Watson, shared her own experience working with Alec while they were still on a project together. She said his insults and controlling behavior had slowly worn down her confidence, especially as someone still trying to find her foot in gaming development. Around the same time, Matt Dawson, a well-known indie developer who had previously lived with Alec and worked with him on Towerfall, also spoke up publicly, saying he believed the accusations and that what he was hearing did not come as a surprise to him. As the situation kept unfolding, Scott tried reaching out to Alec directly to check on him. When Alec finally responded, it was brief and unclear. He then disappeared again, and after that, there was no further communication from him. In the days that followed, Alec did not respond publicly to any of the allegations. As things escalated, local crisis intervention teams in Manitoba and emergency mental health services were brought in to try to support him. But just a few days later, everything came to a sudden stop. On August 31st, 2019, Alec's sister, Eileen Mary Haloka, posted on Twitter that Alec had died by unaliving himself in Winnipeg just 4 days after the allegations against him became public. In her statement, she described him as someone who had struggled for much of his life with serious mental health challenges, and also noted that he had experienced harm himself. She ended her message by asking people not to use what had happened as a reason to target or harass others. On September 3rd, 2019, Scott published a long post on Medium where he looked back on the 6 years he had worked with Alec. In it, he described a pattern he felt he only understood in hindsight, where Alec would connect with people who were excited to make games, bring them into close collaboration, and then create situations where they became emotionally dependent before things eventually fell apart or turned harmful. He also said that some of the people involved had walked away from game development entirely, others had spent years in therapy, and some had been left dealing with lasting trauma from the experience. A little over a week later, on September 12th, Zoe Quinn returned to Twitter after having stepped away following Alec's death. They had deactivated their account due to a wave of harassment, and upon coming back, they shared a short message expressing support and care for others who had been affected. During that time, they were also being heavily targeted online, with some people blaming them for Alec's death and even sending threats, while others were openly labeling them in extreme and hostile terms across comment sections. On October 1st, Eileen published a detailed essay reflecting on what had happened and how people were processing it. In it, she said she believed the survivors of Alec's harm, and that she had always tried to support them, while also acknowledging that Alec had both caused harm to others and experienced harm himself. In her post, she wrote,
"We can acknowledge, support, and believe survivors without needing to try and solve a situation immediately.